Deneb glows near the tail of the swan at about magnitude 125, bright enough to anchor the summer triangle, yet distant enough that the Milky Way's dust and depth still blur certainty. That quiet gap matters because it shows how astronomy turns faint shifts, softened light and patient method into a map of a spiral corridor inside the galaxy. In the next moments, Deneb becomes more than a bright point, becoming a calm signpost for scale stellar life cycles and the layered structure of the Milky Way. If this kind of gentle science storytelling helps the mind slow down, please like the video, subscribe and turn on notifications for more cosmic sleep documentaries. Deneb rests at the tail of Cygnus with a quiet steadiness, and its apparent brightness is simple to notice even when its true scale remains difficult to pin down. The early clarity is this: Deneb looks near and familiar, yet it belongs to a far larger story, where distance and dust reshape what the eye thinks it knows. A concrete fact sits near the surface of the sky. Deneb shines around magnitude 1.25, bright enough to anchor the summer triangle without effort. That matters because a star can be visually easy while physically uncertain, and that gap reveals the limits of observation and the careful methods that close it. By the end, Deneb's place as a luminous marker along a crowded Milky Way direction becomes calm and legible, with scale returning to something the mind can hold. The unique image that keeps returning is the Northern Cross itself, the swan drawn in plain starlight with Deneb glowing at the tail like a pale bead stitched to the edge of a spiral arm corridor. The sky offers Deneb with no instructions, only the sensation of a fixed point that can be returned to night after night. Yet the calm point carries a question that stays gentle rather than urgent. What is seen is not the same as what is there. Brightness in the sky is an invitation, not a guarantee of nearness. A light in a distant window can look like a lamp in the next room, especially when the air between is not clear. In space, the air is replaced by thin clouds of dust and the eye receives only what survives the long passage. Here one idea becomes useful, and soft apparent brightness is the light that arrives, not the light that is made. The difference matters because it decides whether Deneb is merely bright or truly vast. One main number can be allowed to settle magnitude 1.25 as a measure of how much light reaches Earth. It can be translated into a household comparison without strain. It's like a porch light that stands out on a quiet street even when other lights exist because the eye is tuned to notice the brightest points first. A very short line follows almost like a breath. Bright does not mean close. This is the first small unlock, and it opens without drama. The mind often treats the sky as a dome sprinkled with points at roughly equal distance because that model is easy. Deneb refuses that ease while still remaining calm to look at. Its brightness suggests intimacy, yet its physical reality may belong to a realm of enormous size and strong light output. The story begins with how a star becomes a signpost, then widens into how a galaxy becomes readable. The swan itself helps the pacing because it is a shape that can be held with little effort. Cygnus stretches like a slow glide across a dark river, and Deneb sits where the tail would trail behind. Nearby, another triangle of familiarity forms with Deneb joined by Vega and Altair, three lights that make a simple geometry in summer skies. That geometry matters because it provides orientation. Orientation is a kind of comfort, and comfort allows attention to stay steady while scale expands. If a single gentle invitation belongs here, it can be light and brief if listening continues the simple triangle, and the swan can be revisited as a quiet map. The mind keeps one picture, and the narrative steps outward from it. Deneb's physical identity begins with a term that can be kept plain. Spectral class is a star's temperature label from its light. It is like sorting kettles by how hot they glow on a stove. It is like noticing whether a bulb feels warm white or cool white. This matters because temperature shapes colour and colour shapes how much energy a star pours into space. Deneb's light reads as blue-white, a clean pale tone rather than a deep red ember. That colour is not decoration. It is a clue offered in silence. Another term can be introduced without crowding. A supergiant is a very large, very luminous star. It is like a lighthouse scaled to a mountain. It is like a single factory of light in a town of candles. This matters because supergiants live fast and change under pressures that smaller stars never reach. The two ideas, spectral class and supergiant, are enough for now. They place Deneb in a category where enormous output is plausible, and where distance becomes the central uncertainty. The uncertainty is not a failure. It is the edge of measurement, a place where methods are tested. There is a gentle limit that shapes everything here. Distance in space is not measured with a tape, and even the best instruments see tiny shifts and faint distortions. The sky is a long corridor, and the corridor is not empty. Starlight travels through regions filled with thin material that can dim and soften it. Even a bright star can be partly veiled, and that veil can be uneven. This is one reason Deneb becomes a lesson. The star is bright enough to be obvious, yet the details that matter most are just out of easy reach. Another small unlock arrives here, kept slow and practical. In astronomy, uncertainty is often a number, with a range, not a single point. That range is like estimating the distance to a mountain through haze. The outline is clear, the exact miles are less certain. The mind does not need sharp certainty to feel oriented. It needs reliable method and a sense of scale. Deneb provides both because its brightness is reliable, while its distance invites careful thinking. The narrative begins to climb a scale ladder that stays domestic. First rung the star's light is a delay. Light crossing a room is effectively instant to daily life, yet it still takes time. Light crossing a city takes longer, though still too quick to feel. Light crossing the space between stars takes years, and that time can be treated like a slow postal system rather than a flash. Deneb's light arriving now begins long ago, when Earth's nights held different histories. The exact count of years can be left for later because the method matters first. One main number has already been used, and it has done its work. The next rungs can remain qualitative, like walking from a table to a street to a distant hill. The everyday comparison holds the mind steady while distance becomes hard to picture. The paradox appears softly without tension. A bright point can be far away because it is intrinsically powerful. A dim point can be nearby because it is small or partially hidden. This is where intuition reaches for a simpler object and finds it slipping. The eye wants to rank stars by closeness, yet the sky ranks them by received light. The received light is shaped by distance and by what lies between. The result is that the sky's most familiar features can be the hardest to place in depth. Deneb sits inside this paradox with a calm dignity, offering a lesson that is neither alarming nor complicated. The lesson is simply that space is not a flat painting. It is a layered room with fog in places and with lamps of wildly different power. Another visual anchor slows the pacing the Milky Way as a pale band, a faint chalk smear across dark. In the region of Cygnus, that band thickens with stars and dust till like a river seen through reeds. Deneb points toward that richness, not by moving, but by being near the line of sight where the galaxy's plane crowds the view. The mind can picture a long hallway lined with many doors and Deneb as a bright door lamp near a particularly busy stretch. This matters because spiral structure in the Milky Way is inferred from patterns in gas dust and young stars along such busy lines. Deneb becomes a lantern near a corridor that leads into a spiral arm direction, even if the arm itself is not a rigid road. The story promises not a perfect map, but a calm sense of how the map is built. There is one more gentle limit to acknowledge here because it keeps the tone honest. Measurements are made from a moving platform. Earth orbits the Sun, and that motion allows small shifts against distant backgrounds. Yet those shifts for very distant objects become tiny. They can be near the edge of what instruments can confidently separate from noise and subtle biases. The limit is observational, not philosophical. It is like trying to measure the thickness of a hair from across a room. The hair is real, the room is real, and the eyes are simply not precise enough without careful tools. Deneb lives near that edge of precision. That is why it matters. It is a bright, beloved star that still asks for humility about distance. The calm promise continues by the end of this journey. Deneb's brightness will feel less like a simple glow and more like a careful signal that carries information through a complex medium. The swan will remain a familiar figure, and the Milky Way will become a layered structure rather than a flat band. With that foundation, the next section can move gently from what the eye sees to what the light itself reveals, and how colour dust and method begin to separate appearance from reality. Deneb holds its place in the summer triangle with a simplicity that feels almost like a steady pulse. The early clarity is the same 3 bright points that guide casual stargazing, also guide careful measurement, and reveal where that measurement strains. Deneb's light arrives as a clean blue-white tone, yet the space between is not perfectly clear, and that difference shapes every conclusion. The sky offers a domestic geometry first because a triangle is a shape the mind accepts without effort. Vega and Altair form the other corners, and Deneb completes the figure like a quiet stitch that closes a seam. This matters because familiarity keeps attention gentle, while the story begins to widen. A small porch-light feeling settles over the scene as if 3 distant lamps mark the edges of a calm neighbourhood. Then the story nudges inward toward what light can say when it is treated as information rather than decoration. One new term can be introduced here with care. Parallax is a tiny shift in position from different viewpoints. It is like a thumb that seems to move against a distant wall. It is like a streetlight that changes alignment when walking a few steps. This matters because it provides a direct way to estimate distance without guessing brightness. The first small unlock arrives softly. Parallax does not measure light at all. It measures geometry. That means it can anchor other methods when the light is altered by dust. Yet the limit appears with equal calm. The farther the star, the smaller the shift, until the shift becomes comparable to the subtle trembling of measurement itself. The mind can picture trying to notice a coin sliding a hair's width while standing across a large room. The coin moves, yet the eyes struggle to separate the motion from the shimmer of air. The observer does not fail. The task simply reaches a physical boundary. Deneb sits near a boundary where parallax becomes difficult. And that matters because distance is the foundation beneath every other stellar property. If the distance shifts, then the inferred size and output shift too, like a lamp that seems brighter or dimmer, depending on how far away it truly is. A slow visual anchor settles in the Northern Cross stretched across the Milky Way's faint band with Deneb as the tail light of the swan. The band behind is not smooth. It looks like thin smoke laid on black velvet, brightened in some places and thinned in others. In the Cygnus region, the band can seem denser, as though the line of sight passes through a crowded hallway. Deneb glows near that hallway, and the eye cannot help noticing it. The scene remains gentle because the same sky that invites wonder also invites patient method. A second concept can enter and it can stay simple. Extinction is starlight dimmed by dust between star and observer. It is like fog that softens a distant headlight. It is like a thin curtain that turns a bright lamp into a warmer glow. This matters because a far star can be made to look less powerful than it is. A small unlock follows quiet and practical. Dust does not only steal light, it leaves a signature. If the dust dims blue light more than red, the star's colour shifts slightly, and that shift can be measured. The mind can picture sunlight passing through a smoky room, turning a white beam into a mellow amber. The beam still exists, yet its balance changes. In space, that balance change becomes a clue about what lies in the corridor. Deneb's blue-white nature makes that corridor easier to sense, because any warming of its tone can hint at dust along the path. This is where the earlier paradox softens into a usable tool. Brightness alone is ambiguous. Colour and geometry together become more stable. Still, the observational limit remains present because dust is not a single uniform veil, it is patchy. It can clump thin and vary in grain size, and those variations can shift the interpretation. The mind can accept this without strain by imagining a long road at night with occasional pockets of mist. Some stretches are clear, some are hazy, and the headlight looks different with each pocket. The road is the line of sight through the Milky Way. Deneb is the headlight at the far end. The observer is not standing still either. Earth moves, instruments age, and calibration improves. The story remains calm because the process is iterative, like refining a recipe over many evenings. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be held gently. A single year is the baseline for parallax because Earth's orbit provides the changing viewpoint over about 12 months. This can be translated into a household rhythm. It is like walking around a table once looking at the same object from different sides. A very short line follows steady and soft. Time becomes a measuring stick. This matters because it shows how astronomy turns motion into information and how a familiar cycle, the seasons, becomes part of the measurement. Deneb appears in certain seasons, and those seasons also structure the data that tries to place it in depth. Another small unlock arrives around the middle of the section. Deneb's usefulness as a sky anchor is not only cultural or aesthetic, it is methodological. A bright star is easier to observe repeatedly, which allows better statistics and better tracking of subtle changes. That repeated observation is like listening to a quiet clock in a silent room until its rhythm becomes obvious. Even small irregularities begin to stand out, and those irregularities can be sorted into what belongs to the star and what belongs to the path between. The visual anchor returns with warmth, 3 bright points forming a triangle over a dark landscape like 3 lanterns hung at the Satya's corners of an unseen field. The field is the Milky Way background, a textured darkness with faint grain. Deneb's corner feels slightly different because it sits in the swan, a shape that suggests motion. The swan does not flap, it glides. That is how the pacing stays soft. The narrative glides too from sky pattern to measurement, from measurement to limitation, and from limitation back to a steadier understanding. The limitation is not an end. It is a boundary that encourages multiple methods. Parallax offers geometry where it can. Extinction explains why light arrives altered. Together they prepare the next step where Deneb's intrinsic nature becomes clearer and where the star's own physical scale can be approached without thwarting certainty. The transition stays gentle, the triangle remains in place and the light remains calm, while the next section turns from the corridor to the lamp itself and begins to read Deneb's colour as a kind of quiet thermometer. Deneb's blue-white light feels clean and uncomplicated, like a steady lamp seen through a clear pane. The early clarity is this colour is not just beauty in the sky, but a practical handle on temperature and on what the space between has changed. When Deneb is read as a signal, its pale tone begins to describe a hot surface and a complicated path. The mind can hold the star as a simple point, yet the point carries a spectrum of information spread across many wavelengths. The story stays calm by keeping attention on what can be pictured. Deneb sits at the swan's tail and the Northern Cross is still the slow anchor in the background. The Milky Way behind remains a faint band as if chalk has been brushed across dark cloth. In that band the Cygnus region appears crowded like a hallway filled with distant, quiet lights. Deneb stands out as one of the brightest lamps in that hallway, even though the hallway extends far beyond easy depth perception. One new term can be introduced here with care. Spectral class is a temperature label from a star's light. It is like sorting stove burners by their glow. It is like reading the warmth of a bulb by its colour. This matters because temperature controls what kind of light a star produces most. Deneb's spectral class places it among stars that appear blue-white rather than orange or red. That appearance is a direct clue that the surface is hot, and hot surfaces radiate strongly in shorter wavelengths. The first small unlock arrives gently. Colour becomes a thermometer. It is not perfect, but it is more stable than mere brightness. The mind can picture heating a piece of metal. It starts dull, then red, then pale, and the change is reliable even when the room is dim. Deneb's pale tone sits in that reliable pattern. Yet space adds an extra layer. Dust in the line of sight can shift colour, making a star look slightly warmer than it truly is. That is where the earlier idea of extinction quietly returns, not as a separate technical topic, but as a soft reminder that the corridor is not empty. The visual anchor holds steady 3 bright points of the summer triangle like 3 lanterns hung high above a sleeping landscape. Deneb's lantern is the one that touches the swan, giving the triangle a sense of motion even though nothing moves. A second concept can be added without crowding. Luminosity is total light a star produces each second. It is like a lamp's wattage, not its apparent brightness. It is like comparing a lighthouse to a candle regardless of distance. This matters because a far star can still look bright if it is immensely luminous. Here, one main number can be allowed, and it can be translated immediately. Deneb's luminosity is on the order of a couple 100,000 suns. That can be pictured as turning on every household light in a large city, then gathering that glow into one point. A very short line follows soft and steady. One star can outshine a crowd. The second small unlock arrives in that sentence. Deneb's brightness in the sky is no longer a simple accident. It is plausibly the result of a star that is intrinsically powerful. The story remains careful because the exact value depends on distance, and distance is the delicate part. The observer sees a bright point, measures a colour, estimates a corridor of dust, and then tries to infer what the star emits. Each step adds uncertainty, and the uncertainty stays gentle rather than frustrating. It is like estimating the output of a heater seen through a window on a cold night. The glow is visible, but the room's curtains and distance change how it looks. The heater may be stronger than it seems, or less strong, and only a combination of clues narrows the range. Deneb lives in that narrowing. It is bright enough to study, yet far enough to keep the range wide. This is the observational limit in a calm form when distance is uncertain inferred, size and luminosity float within a band. The mind does not need a sharp number to feel the scale. It needs an honest sense of what is constrained and what is not. Another visual anchor arrives with warmth and slowness. The swan's outline is traced again not as a constellation chart but as a simple gesture in darkness. The head of Cygnus points toward one direction of the Milky Way, and the tail-light Deneb rests at the far end of the shape like a pale bead on a thread. The thread is the line of sight into the galaxy's plane, where dust lanes cut through faint starlight. Those dust lanes can be pictured as smoke ribbons in a beam of sunlight. The beam still passes, but its pattern changes. This matters because Deneb's blue-white light travels through those ribbons, and the received colour and brightness are shaped by them. The story keeps its pace by returning to the domestic. A lighthouse does not become less powerful because fog makes it look softer. Fog changes the arriving beam, not the lamp. Dust does something similar, and the observer must separate lamp from fog. The separation is never perfect because the corridor is long and the fog is patchy. That patchiness is one reason distance is hard. If a corridor has clear segments and hazy segments, the same lamp can look different on different nights or in different measurements. Instruments also have their own small biases. Calibrations improve, detectors change, and models of dust vary. The calm tone remains because this is not chaos. It is slow refinement. It is like adjusting a recipe by tasting again and again, learning how ingredients behave. The third small unlock arrives around the mid-late flow. Deneb's role as a signpost begins to emerge. A star that is both bright and hot is often young or massive, or both, and such stars tend to live near the regions where star formation is active. Those regions cluster along spiral arm patterns and galaxies. Deneb's direction in the sky toward the Cygnus region aligns with a part of the Milky Way that is rich in gas and dust, the raw material of new stars. The arm itself is not a rigid lane, but a pattern of density and activity like a slow traffic wave on a highway. Cars move through, yet the wave can persist. Deneb's light, powerful and pale, becomes a lantern near such a wave, even if its exact distance along the corridor remains under debate. This matters because mapping the Milky Way from inside requires using such lanterns along with gas clouds and the clusters to infer structure. The mind reaches for a clear picture and meets a gentle limit again. From within the galaxy, spiral arms cannot be seen like a photograph. The view is obstructed by dust and by perspective. The arms are inferred, stitched together from many partial measures. That is the intuition limit. The pattern is real, yet it is not visible as a single clean curve in the sky. Deneb contributes one stitch bright enough to hold but not precise enough to define the whole fabric alone. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can slow down further and focus on distance itself, as a craft moving from colour and power to the patient ladder of measurements that tries to place Deneb in depth without forcing certainty. Deneb's light seems to arrive from a fixed place, yet the mind senses that the place is more like a depth than a point. The early clarity is this distance is the hidden dial behind nearly every claim about Deneb, and that dial is hard to turn with confidence. The sky gives Deneb without a label, so the label must be built from careful geometry and patient cross-checks. The Northern Cross remains the slow visual anchor, and Deneb still sits at the tail like a pale bead on a dark thread. The Milky Way behind looks like faint flour scattered on black cloth thicker, in Cygnus thinner elsewhere. That background matters because it reminds the eye that the corridor toward Deneb is crowded and dusty. A crowded corridor complicates distance because the corridor adds dimming confusion and overlapping lights. One new term can be introduced here with care, and it can do real work. Standard candle is an object with known true brightness. It is like a bulb with a fixed wattage. It is like a calibrated weight used on a scale. This matters because if the true output is known, distance can be inferred from how dim it looks. The first small unlock arrives softly. Distance is not always measured directly. Often it is inferred by comparing what is received to what is expected. That comparison can be stable when the known object is truly known. Deneb, however, is not a simple standard candle. Its true output depends on its size, its evolution, and the dust between. That is why Deneb becomes an exercise in method rather than a single quick answer. The mind can picture a lamp seen through fog. If the lamp's wattage is uncertain and the fog's thickness varies, then distance cannot be read from brightness alone. A second concept can enter, and it can stay plain. Parallax is a tiny shift from Earth's changing viewpoint. It is like a coin seeming to slide against a far wall. It is like a nearby tree shifting relative to a distant hill. This matters because parallax uses geometry, not guessed brightness. Parallax is the closest thing to a direct ruler, yet it has a gentle limit. For very distant stars, the shift is so small that it competes with an instrument noise and subtle biases. The observer is not failing. The signal is simply tiny. The mind can picture trying to notice a hair's movement while standing across a gymnasium. The hair moves, but the air shimmer, and the eye's own flicker can hide it. Deneb sits near a range where parallax can be measured, but with uncertainty that still matters. That uncertainty spreads outward into every derived property, like a small wobble at the base of a tall ladder. Another visual anchor arrives with warmth. The summer triangle hangs over a quiet horizon like three lanterns at the corners of a wide field. Deneb's lantern touches the swan, which gives the scene a gentle sense of drift. The field below is dark and still, and the triangle's geometry feels domestic, like a simple quilting pattern stitched into the sky. This matters because the human mind relaxes when it can return to a fixed shape. Relaxation allows the next idea to land without strain. The idea is that distance in astronomy often uses a ladder of methods, not a single measurement. Each rung supports the next. Parallax supports nearby calibrations, calibrations support brightness-based estimates. Dust corrections support clearer comparisons. Deneb sits in a zone where multiple rungs overlap, and overlap is valuable because it reveals where methods agree and where they diverge. The second small unlock arrives here. Disagreement is not only confusion, it is information about what is missing. If two methods yield different distances, then either the star's intrinsic output is misestimated, or the dust correction is off, or the data contains subtle systematics. Each possibility points to a place where models can improve. Deneb is bright enough and important enough to be used as a test case. Yet the story remains gentle. The goal is not to force certainty. The goal is to understand why the uncertainty exists and what it implies. This is where the observational limit can be spoken in a neutral tone. Measurements depend on assumptions, and assumptions depend on models of dust and on the star's physical state. Deneb is a supergiant, and supergiants can have winds and the variability that alter their light. The light is still real, yet it is not a perfectly steady laboratory source. The corridor is also not a uniform tube. The Milky Way's plane is textured with dust lanes that can thicken like smoke ribbons and then thin abruptly. The mind can picture driving through a long valley at dawn. Fog pools in low places, clears on ridges, then returns near rivers. A distant lamp may brighten and dim, not because it changes, but because the path changes. Deneb's path crosses a rich part of the galaxy, and that richness complicates the inference. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated into a soft everyday comparison. A parallax shift for a distant bright star can be on the order of 1,000th of an arcsecond. That can be pictured as seeing a coin shift by the thickness of a fingernail from many kilometers away. A very short line follows calm and steady. The ruler becomes almost too fine. This matters because it explains why even modern measurements can yield a range for Deneb's distance. The range is not a flaw in the star, it is the reality of measuring tiny angles on a moving platform. The mind can hold this as a practical craft rather than a mystery. There is a quiet satisfaction in knowing what can be measured and how. Another visual anchor returns. Deneb at the swan's tail with the Milky Way behind resembles a bead held near a smoky window. The bead gleams, but the smoke adds softness. The rest of Cygnus is a faint lattice around it, and the whole pattern floats in a darkness that feels deep but safe. The third small unlock arrives in the way the ladder of distance connects to Deneb's role in the Milky Way. If Deneb's distance shifts, then its placement relative to spiral arm patterns shifts. That affects how it is used as a marker in the Cygnus direction. Yet even with uncertainty, Deneb still indicates a line of sight into a star-forming corridor because its hot, luminous nature fits environments where massive stars are common. The arm is not a painted stripe. It is a pattern, inferred from many markers. Deneb is one marker, and its uncertainty encourages the use of many others. This is the intuition limit in a calm form. The galaxy cannot be seen from outside with the naked eye. The structure must be reconstructed from within through dust perspective and incomplete data. The mind wants a crisp spiral drawn on a page. What exists is a stitched tapestry made from overlapping clues. Deneb's light is one bright stitch, and its uncertainty keeps the stitching honest. The transition stays soft. The next section can step down the ladder into a more domestic sense of scale, turning distance into time delay and walkable comparisons, so the corridor towards Cygnus feels less abstract and more gently measurable. Deneb's light reaches Earth with the quiet patience of a message that has been travelling for a very long time. Distance becomes more gentle when it is treated as time delay rather than empty space. A single point at the swan's tail can feel close, yet the corridor behind it stretches deep into the Milky Way's crowded plain. The Northern Cross remains the steady anchor, and Deneb still sits at the far end like a pale bead on a slow thread. The Milky Way behind looks like faint chalk rubbed into velvet thickened in Cygnus. That background matters because it reminds the mind that Deneb is seen through a layered hallway of stars and dust. One new term can enter here and it can do calm work. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 year. It is like a letter carried at the speed of light for 12 months. It is like measuring a road by how long a fast train needs. This matters because it turns distance into a familiar unit of time. The first small unlock arrives softly. Space can be counted in years. That means Deneb is not only far, Deneb is long ago in a precise physical sense. One main number can be allowed held loosely and translated at once. Deneb is roughly a couple thousand light years away. That is like waiting thousands of New Year's days for a single flash to arrive. A very short line follows steady and quiet. Distance is delay. This matters because it reshapes what is meant by now in astronomy. The light that touches Earth tonight begins its trip when many generations pass between then and now. The mind does not need to name the historical years, it only needs to feel the rhythm of repeated seasons as a measuring stick. The summer triangle rises and sets, and each cycle is another mark on the same long journey of light. A visual anchor settles in 3 bright points overhead, like 3 lanterns hung high over a sleeping field. Deneb's lantern is the one that connects to the swan, giving the triangle a gentle sense of glide. The glide is not motion in space, it is motion in attention from familiar geometry to deep distance. Another small unlock follows when the mind holds the light year as a domestic ladder. 1 year is a calendar on a wall. 10 years is a shelf of old notebooks. 100 years is a house that outlasts its first paint. 1,000 years is a town whose stones have been repaired many times. A couple thousand light years becomes a message older than the oldest living memories. The scale remains calm because it stays anchored in countable time, yet a quiet limit appears and it deserves a neutral voice. The mind is not built to picture thousands of years at once. It compresses them into a single blur. That is an intuition limit, not a failure. The light year helps because it attaches distance to a repeated unit, but it still stretches beyond easy imagery. The corridor towards Cygnus adds another limit. Dust and crowded background stars can confuse what is measured. Even when distance is expressed as time, the measurement behind it depends on subtle shifts and careful correction. The result is a range rather than a single crisp placement. That is the observational limit. In its calm form, instruments measure small signals through a complicated path, and the best answer can still be a band. A visual anchor returns to keep the corridor gentle. The Milky Way in Cygnus can look like a pale river with darker lanes, as if smoke drifts across it in slow ribbons. Deneb sits near that river, bright enough to be noticed at a glance. The river's texture matters because it hints at depth and clutter. A star seen against a smooth background is simpler. A star seen against a crowded river is harder to isolate. The second small unlock arrives quietly. The busy background is not only an obstacle, it is context. Cygnus points along a direction where the galaxy's disk is rich in gas dust and young stars. Deneb's presence as a hot luminous beacon fits a region where massive stars are more common. Even if the exact distance is uncertain, the direction still tells a story about where the Milky Way is active. The story remains gentle because it does not force Deneb into a perfect role. It simply places Deneb near a corridor that matters for mapping spiral structure from inside. The spiral pattern itself stays soft in language. From within the galaxy, an arm is not a painted stripe in the sky. It is a tendency, a crowding of material and starlight along certain long sightlines. That is another intuition limit. The mind wants a clean spiral drawn on a page. The real view is partial dimmed and stitched together from many clues. Deneb is one bright stitch, and the light year gives a way to speak about the stitch's depth without insisting on a single number. Another visual anchor arrives warm and slow. The swan's outline is traced again like a simple quilt pattern held against darkness. Deneb's position at the tail feels like a finishing knot. That knot does not merely decorate the pattern, it provides a stable reference that can be returned to night after night, while the imagination works with scale. The third small unlock follows as the scale ladder extends outward in a controlled way. If Deneb is thousands of light years away, then the corridor behind it includes many layers of interstellar material. Each layer can be pictured as a thin pane of lightly tinted glass. Stacked together, the panes dim and warm the light in a measurable way. That image matters because it explains why even a powerful blue-white star can arrive softened. It also explains why brightness alone is not a safe ruler. A lighthouse can look gentle through many panes, yet still be enormous in output. The calm method is to pair the time-based distance idea with careful reading of the arriving light. The result is not a single dramatic revelation. It is a steady improvement in placement. Another observational limit can be spoken softly because it helps the listener rest inside uncertainty. Measurements improve with time, yet they never become infinite in precision. For distant stars, tiny angular shifts and patchy dust corrections set a floor on certainty. That floor is not frightening. It is simply the edge of what can be resolved from one small corner of the galaxy. The mind can accept that edge like the horizon at sea. The horizon is clear, yet the exact line wavers with atmosphere. The ocean is still real, the line is still useful. The fourth small unlock arrives in a distilled line that rests easily in the air. A far star becomes closer when its distance is understood as time, That matters because it turns Deneb into a kind of quiet clock, not by ticking but by delivering an ancient beam into the present night. The night sky becomes a layered archive, and Deneb becomes one bright page in that archive. The page is not perfectly dated yet, it is readable. A final visual anchor settles the scene again in domestic calm. The summer triangle hangs over a dark landscape like three lamps above a sleeping yard. Deneb's lamp looks steady and cool, and the Milky Way behind remains a faint textured band. With time as distance now in place, the next section can turn from the corridor to the star's own physical scale, keeping the same calm ladder of the comparisons while approaching size and surface conditions without forcing exactness. Deneb's brightness hides an even quieter fact that the star's size is so large it challenges everyday shape and scale. The early clarity is this: Deneb can be physically enormous even when its distance remains partly uncertain. The swan's tail light is still a simple point to the eye, yet the mind can begin to picture a vast sphere of hot gas, where edge is not a hard line. The Northern Cross stays as a steady pattern like a stitched figure on black cloth, and Deneb sits at the tail as the finishing knot. The Milky Way behind looks like a pale river, with darker lanes, and the river's texture hints at depth and clutter. That clutter matters because it complicates distance, and distance is the partner of size. One new term can enter gently and do real work. Angular diameter is an object's apparent size in the sky. It is like the width of a coin held at arm's length. It is like a distant street lamp that looks smaller as it recedes. This matters because if the apparent size is known, physical size can be inferred with distance. The first small unlock arrives softly. A star can have a measurable width without looking like a disk to the eye. Special techniques can sense tiny patterns in its light and tease out a size. Yet Deneb lives near an observational limit. The star is far, so its apparent width is extremely small. The measurement becomes sensitive to calibration, atmospheric blur, and model choices. The mind can picture trying to judge the width of a far lighthouse beam through thin haze. The beam is real, but its edges are soft, and the haze makes the boundary uncertain. That is not failure. It is the natural boundary of resolution. Deneb's size estimate is therefore tied to the distance estimate, and both can shift together. A slow visual anchor settles again Deneb at the swan's tail, cool white against the dim Milky Way band, like a pale bead hovering above a smoky seam. The scene stays calm because the same simple sky pattern remains even while the physical picture grows larger. One main number can be allowed here, and translated immediately. Deneb's radius is on the order of about 200 times the sun's radius. That can be pictured as this: if the sun were a basketball, Deneb would be as wide as a large house. A very short line follows steady and quiet. A point can hide a giant. This matters because size changes everything about how a star behaves. A larger star has lower surface gravity at its outer layers, and its atmosphere can be more extended and delicate. Deneb becomes less like a compact lamp and more like a glowing globe with a soft boundary. The second small unlock arrives in a domestic comparison that stays gentle. A compact object has a clear edge like a smooth ball. Deneb's edge is more like fog around a lantern. Light emerges from a region that blends outward, rather than stopping suddenly. That idea keeps the mind from forcing Deneb into a hard-shelled sphere. It also prepares a calm understanding of why measurements can differ. Different wavelengths of light can appear to come from slightly different depths in the star's outer layers. The boundary is not a single wall. Another visual anchor returns warm and slow. The summer triangle hangs overhead like three lanterns above a quiet field, and Deneb's lantern looks steady and cool. The field below is dark, and the triangle's geometry remains domestic like a simple quilt pattern. That matters because calm geometry can hold attention, while the physical star becomes vast. The story stays grounded by keeping the number count small and the images steady. The radius number is enough, everything else can be held in plain language. Deneb is very large and its outer layers are soft. One more term can enter and it can clarify the softness without adding clutter. Photosphere is the layer where most visible light escapes. It is like the glowing surface seen on a hot ember. It is like the bright skin of a cloud lit from within. This matters because the photosphere is a practical surface, not a solid one. The third small unlock follows calmly. When a star is discussed as having a surface, it is really a region where the gas becomes transparent enough for light to leave. That region can shift with temperature density and wavelength. For a large supergiant like Deneb, the photosphere can be more extended, and its structure can be influenced by gentle waves and flowing material. This is where the intuition limit appears in a neutral tone. The mind expects an object to have a definite boundary. A star does not. A star is a gradient of gas and radiation thickening inward and thinning outward. The boundary is defined by where light can escape, and that definition depends on how it is measured. Deneb's size is therefore a story of definitions as much as a story of distance. It is not vague in a careless way, it is soft in a physical way, like mist around a lamp. Another visual anchor settles in the Cygnus region itself. The Milky Way's band behind Deneb resembles a river seen through reeds with pale glow and darker streaks. Deneb appears as a clean, bright lamp above that river, and the contrast is soothing. The river's darker lanes can be pictured as smoke ribbons, and those ribbons remind the mind that the corridor is not empty. Dust dims and reddens light, and that can nudge inferred properties. Distance uncertainty and dust correction. Uncertainty, join hands, and size depends on both. This is the observational limit spoken gently when the corridor is complex. The best answer includes a range. Deneb's radius being on the order of a certain value is not a dodge. It is a truthful way to express what the data support. A distilled line can rest here without label. Precision has a horizon. That matters because it keeps the narrative calm and honest, and it prevents false certainty from becoming stimulation. The story continues by holding what is stable. Deneb is hot and luminous, and it is very large. Its photosphere is a region, not a wall. Its apparent size is tiny in the sky, so measurement is delicate. These points are enough to make the next step feel natural. A star this large does not remain perfectly still. Gentle motions can pass through its outer layers, and flowing material can leave the star as a wind. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can listen for Deneb's subtle breathing in light, where small variability and surface waves hint at structure without needing a sharper ruler than the sky can provide. Deneb's light looks steady to the eye, yet careful watching reveals a softness, as if the star's surface gently shifts its brightness. The early clarity is this small variations can be a calm way to sense a star's interior without ever seeing inside. The swan's tail light remains a simple point, but the point carries a faint rhythm shaped by a very large living atmosphere. The Northern Cross stays as a quiet pattern, and Deneb still marks the tail like a pale knot on a dark thread. The Milky Way behind remains a faint river, with darker lanes like smoke ribbons, and that river keeps the corridor feeling deep. This matters because a deep corridor complicates measurement, and small variability must be separated from corridor effects. One new term can enter here and do real work. Variability is a star's brightness changing over time. It is like a lamp that flickers slightly in wind. It is like a candle that brightens and dims as air moves. This matters because the pattern of change can reveal physical processes at the star's surface. The first small unlock arrives softly. Not all changes in brightness are dramatic. Some are gentle, irregular, and small, and those are often the most informative for large stars. Deneb is a supergiant with an extended photosphere, and an extended photosphere can support waves and slow motions. The mind can picture a wide, warm ocean surface under a light breeze. The ocean does not jump. It undulates. The surface is still coherent, yet never perfectly still. Deneb's light can carry a similar sense of slow motion. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated immediately. Deneb's brightness can vary by a few hundredths of a magnitude. That is like a room light whose dimmer is nudged by a fingertip barely noticeable unless watched patiently. A very short line follows steady and quiet. Small changes can matter. This matters because subtle variability is often a signature of pulsations and surface structure rather than external events. A second concept can enter without crowding, and it can stay plain. Pulsation is a star's gentle expansion and contraction. It is like a slow breath in a sleeping chest. It is like a soft drum skin rising and settling. This matters because pulsations connect the surface to deeper layers. The second small unlock arrives in the way pulsation avoids sharp edges. A supergiant does not pulse like a metronome. It can have many overlapping modes like several slow waves crossing on a lake. Some waves reinforce, some cancel, and the result is a pattern that can look irregular while still being physical. Deneb's light can therefore drift and return without a strict period. That drift is soothing to imagine because it turns the star from a rigid beacon into a dynamic sphere with gentle internal weather. Another visual anchor settles in warm and slow. Deneb at the swan's tail is like a pale lamp above a smoky river, and the river is the Milky Way band. The lamp's glow is steady enough to guide the eye, yet a patient observer can sense a slight shimmer in long records of brightness. The shimmer is not a sparkle like a nearby star twinkling in Earth's air. It is a measured change that remains when atmospheric effects are averaged out. This matters because it shows how observation distinguishes local distortion from real stellar behaviour. The observational limit appears here in a neutral tone. From Earth, the atmosphere adds its own flicker, and instruments add their own drift. Separating a tiny stellar variation from those influences requires time repetition and calibration. It is like trying to hear a quiet clock in a room where a fan is running. The clock is there, but the fan adds noise. With enough listening, the clock's tick becomes clear. Deneb's variability is that quiet tick heard through layers of noise. The mind can rest in the patience of the method. Patience is part of the science, and it also matches the sleep documentary pace. The third small unlock arrives when variability is tied back to size. A star with a radius on the order of hundreds of suns has a large surface area and a low surface gravity at the outer layers. That makes the outer layers easier to lift and to move. Gentle pulsations can therefore appear without tearing the star apart. The mind can picture a very large thin fabric stretched wide. A small breeze can make it billow in slow waves. A smaller, tighter fabric would resist. Deneb's outer layers are more like the wide fabric. The result is a calm, slow variability that fits a supergiant. Another visual anchor returns to the summer triangle. 3 lanterns hang overhead, and Deneb's lantern is the one that touches the swan. If one lantern has a barely shifting flame, the triangle remains the same shape, yet the living quality becomes more apparent. The triangle stays domestic and the motion stays small, which keeps the tension gentle. This matters because it prevents the story from turning into a dramatic narrative. Deneb's changes are not an alarm. They are a tool. They let astronomers infer something about the star's structure and evolution. The inference is careful because models are involved. This is where the intuition limit returns softly. The mind wants a direct picture of an interior like cutting a fruit to see its layers. A star cannot be cut. Its interior is inferred from light, and light is filtered by the star's atmosphere and by the corridor of dust. Pulsations are one of the few ways the interior can tap on the surface. Yet the taps are subtle and multiple interpretations can fit the same small variations. That is not confusion. It is model dependence. It is like hearing distant thunder and deciding whether it comes from one storm or several. The sound is real, but the map of sources can remain uncertain. Deneb's variability therefore teaches a calm form of humility. It shows what can be learned without pretending to know everything. A distilled line can rest here without label. The surface is a messenger. This matters because it links small brightness changes to deeper processes, keeping the narrative grounded while still allowing gentle speculation. Deneb may be in a late stage where internal layers shift, where energy transport changes, and where winds begin to carry material outward. The light variations are one sign that the star is not static. Another sign lies in the star's wind, the slow outflow of gas from its extended outer layers. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can follow that outflow, keeping the images domestic and the numbers controlled as Deneb begins to return matter to the Milky Way corridor that it quietly illuminates. Deneb's glow feels calm and fixed, yet some of the star is quietly leaving, carried outward into the dark. The early clarity is this: a supergiant does not only shine, it also sheds, and that shedding links Deneb to the Milky Way's ongoing recycling. The swan's tail light remains a simple point, but the point is surrounded by a thin extended atmosphere where gas can drift away instead of falling back. The Northern Cross stays as a steady quilt pattern in the sky, and Deneb still sits at the tail like a pale knot on a dark thread. Behind it, the Milky Way looks like a faint river with darker lanes, as if smoke ribbons cross a soft chalk band. That background matters because the corridor towards Cygnus is rich in material, and Deneb's outflow becomes part of that same richness. One new term can enter gently and do real work. Stellar wind is gas flowing outward from a star into space. It is like warm steam rising from a kettle. It is like a slow mist drifting off a heated lake. This matters because the wind carries matter away and reshapes the star's later life. First small unlock arrives softly. A star can lose mass without any sudden event. The loss can be steady, thin and persistent, like evaporation rather than a burst. Deneb's size and luminosity make this plausible. Blur's large, luminous star has an outer atmosphere that is easier to lift. The outflow is not visible as a plume to the naked eye. It is sensed indirectly, which keeps the story calm and grounded. Another visual anchor settles in Deneb, as a pale lamp above a smoky river, with the swan's outline faintly held in the surrounding stars. The lamp seems clean-edged, yet the physical boundary is more like a haze, where gas thins outward and can be nudged away. This matters because it prevents the mind from forcing a solid surface onto a gaseous star. The wind begins in a region where gravity is weaker, and the atmosphere is extended. Gentle pulsations can stir the gas, and the star's intense light can push on atoms and dust grains. The image stays domestic. A very large hot bath gives off steam even when the water looks still. Deneb gives off matter even when the star looks steady. One main number can be allowed here held loosely and translated at once. Deneb may lose mass on the order of a millionth of a sun each year. That is like a vast reservoir giving off a fine mist day after day without changing its surface in an obvious way. A very short line follows quiet and firm. Slow loss adds up. This matters because over long time steady shedding can change a star's fate, and it also enriches the surrounding galaxy with processed material. The second small unlock arrives as the wind becomes a bridge between two scales. On the scale of a single night, Deneb is a point in a familiar triangle. On the scale of thousands of years, Deneb is a source of fresh atoms drifting into the Milky Way's disk. The atoms do not move as a neat stream. They spread, mix, cool, and join the galaxy's diffuse clouds. The mind can picture a flower drifting from a baker's hands into still air. The flower does not form a line. It forms a soft haze that settles into the room. Deneb's wind is a cosmic version of that gentle spreading, though far more rarefied. Another visual anchor returns slow and warm. The Milky Way band in Cygnus resembles a river seen through reeds with pale glow and darker streaks. Deneb rests near the river like a porchlight near water, and the wind is like a faint fog that does not show unless a beam catches it. The observational limit appears here in a neutral tone. The wind is not photographed as a drifting cloud around Deneb in ordinary light. It is inferred from how Deneb's light interacts with the escaping gas. That inference depends on models and on subtle signatures that can be small. The mind wants a direct picture, like seeing breath on a cold morning. In space, the breath is too thin and too distant for that simple view. Instead, the evidence arrives as changes in the star's spectrum, the detailed pattern of light across wavelengths. One new term can enter here, and it can explain the evidence without adding clutter. A spectral line is a narrow mark where atoms absorb or emit light. It's like a barcode printed into starlight. It is like a fingerprint pressed onto glass. This matters because lines reveal what the gas is doing and where it is moving. The third small unlock arrives softly. If gas is flowing outward, the lines can shift and distort in characteristic ways because motion changes the light's apparent wavelength. The star itself becomes a backlight shining through its own outflow. The image stays gentle. A lantern seen through a thin veil can show patterns in the veil, not by making the veil bright, but by letting the veil slightly reshape the lantern's beam. Deneb's spectrum is that lantern beam. The wind is the veil. Yet the veil is complicated. It can be clumpy, time variable, and affected by the star's pulsations. That is another observational limit. Different models can fit the same line shapes, and the data can be influenced by the corridor of interstellar material as well. This is not confusion in a dramatic sense. It is the quiet reality of inference at long distance. Another visual anchor settles in the Swan again. The Northern Cross remains a simple lattice, and Deneb at the tail feels like a finishing stitch. Around that stitch, the imagination places an invisible expanding shell of rare gas, so thin it would pass unnoticed in any room on Earth. This matters because it keeps the scale honest. The wind is powerful over time, yet it is not dense. It is a slow transfer, not a storm. The fourth small unlock arrives as the wind is connected to Deneb's role in the spiral arm corridor. The Cygnus direction points into regions rich in gas and dust where new stars form. Deneb's outflow adds a small contribution to that reservoir, and the contribution matters because star formation depends on chemistry and cooling. Heavier elements and dust grains help clouds shed heat and collapse, and those grains often come from evolved stars. Deneb is not the only source, and it does not need to be. It is one luminous example that makes the cycle easier to hold in mind. The intuition limit returns softly. A spiral arm can sound like a fixed structure, like a plank road in the galaxy. In reality, it is a pattern of density and activity, and the material inside it is always evolving and mixing. Deneb's wind does not travel along a painted lane. It disperses into a rotating disk shaped by turbulence, magnetic fields, and the gravity of the galaxy. The mind wants straight arrows. The galaxy offers slow curved drifts. Another distilled line can rest here without label. The Milky Way is a mixer. This matters because it frames Deneb's shedding as part of a long, gentle blending, not a neat delivery. The calm promise continues. Deneb is a light that helps mark a direction in the galaxy, and it is also a source of matter that joins the same direction's clouds. The story stays grounded by holding two scales at once, the familiar pattern of Cygnus and the slow exchange of material across the Milky Way's disk. The transition remains soft and safe. The next section can step deeper into Deneb's life stage, where internal evolution and mass loss together shape what the star becomes without opening any sharp cliffhanger or new mystery. Deneb keeps shining, with a steady, cool white calm, even as its inner life shifts toward a different balance of forces. The early clarity is this: Deneb is not frozen in time, and its future depends on a few quiet parameters that are difficult to measure from far away. The Northern Cross remains the gentle frame, and Deneb stays at the swan's tail like a pale knot that finishes a stitched figure. Behind it, the Milky Way in Cygnus still resembles a faint river, with darker lanes, as if smoke ribbons drift across chalk on velvet. That familiar sky picture matters because it holds the mind steady, while the physical picture becomes more subtle. A supergiant can look unchanged for human lifetimes, yet change can be underway in the deep interior. One new term can enter here and do real work. Evolutionary stage is a star's phase of internal energy making. It is like a factory changing which fuel it burns. It is like a kitchen switching from simmer to bake. This matters because different fuels and structures lead to different surface behavior and different endings. The first small unlock arrives softly. A star's surface can stay similar while the core reorganizes. The visible light is the outward face of a deeper engine, and the engine can change gears without a loud signal. Deneb's pale colour and immense luminosity suggest a star that has already left the simple, steady conditions of a main sequence life. That statement remains careful because distance and dust still affect the inferred luminosity, and luminosity helps constrain the star's mass and history. The corridor towards Cygnus stays complicated, and the measurement remains a range. The observational limit is calm and practical. Distance uncertainty becomes luminosity. Uncertainty and luminosity uncertainty becomes uncertainty about which evolutionary track is most likely. The mind wants a single timeline on a page. The sky offers only partial evidence and models fill those gaps. Another visual anchor settles in warm and slow. Deneb sits above the Milky Way band like a porch light over a river, and the river's texture hints at deep layers of gas and dust. The porch light looks simple, yet the house behind it is large and full of rooms. Deneb's interior is like that house with layered regions where energy moves outward in different ways. The second small unlock follows in a distilled line that rests without effort. Surface calm can hide interior change. This matters because it prevents a false expectation that big change must look dramatic. For supergiants, the drama can be slow and the clues can be subtle. Deneb's gentle variability and its wind already suggest a star with a soft outer boundary. Those are signs that the outer layers are extended and responsive. They do not announce a single future, but they narrow the range of plausible futures.
The debate is
low stakes, with Deneb may be on a path toward cooler, redder conditions, or it may already be returning from such a phase. Both possibilities can be framed without forcing certainty. The key difference lies in how much mass has been lost and how the internal layers have rearranged. One main number can be allowed here and translated immediately while staying gently approximate. Deneb's mass is often placed at on the order of about 20 suns. That can be pictured as one body carrying the material of a small crowd, like a single loaded truck among bicycles. A very short line follows steady and quiet. Mass sets the pace. This matters because mass controls how fast fuel is consumed and how strongly gravity compresses the core. Yet mass is not directly weighed from afar. It is inferred through luminosity, temperature and models, and those inferences shift when distance shifts. That is the observational limit, spoken softly again. A far star's mass is a best estimate, not a direct measurement. Another visual anchor returns to the summer triangle. 3 lanterns hang overhead, and Deneb's lantern touches the swan, giving the triangle a gentle glide across the season. The lantern does not flicker much, but patient records show small changes, and those changes matter, because they hint at an outer envelope that is not rigid. In a large star, an envelope can swell and relax over long times, and it can move material outward through winds. That material loss can change the star's later evolution by stripping outer layers and revealing deeper ones. The third small unlock arrives quietly. Losing the outer coat can change the colour and temperature later. This matters because it explains how a star can move across categories over time, becoming cooler and redder, or becoming hotter again after shedding. The mind can picture a warm object wrapped in thick cloth. With the cloth on the outside feels cooler and softer. With the cloth removed, the warmer inner layer is more exposed. This image is not exact physics, but it keeps the intuition gentle and useful. Deneb's future colour depends on how its outer layers evolve and how much remains bound. The corridor of dust also complicates colour readings, which adds another calm uncertainty. Dust can make blue-white light look slightly warmer, and that can blur the boundary between a truly cooler surface and a reddened beam. The intuition limit appears here in a neutral tone. Colour in the sky is not a direct thermometer when the corridor is tinted. The best inferences rely on careful correction and on detailed spectra, and even then they carry model dependence. Another visual anchor settles again in Cygnus. The Milky Way river behind Deneb looks thicker here, as if the line of sight passes through a busy district of the galaxy. That matters because Deneb is not an isolated object in an empty room. It's part of a region with star-forming activity and complex interstellar material. That environment does not control Deneb's internal evolution, but it does influence how Deneb is observed. It adds absorption lines, reddening, and confusion from background stars. The fourth small unlock follows as the meaning of uncertainty becomes calmer. Uncertainty is not ignorance. It is a boundary that defines what is known. This matters because it turns the story from a demand for certainty into a patient map of constraints. Deneb's brightness and temperature place it among luminous massive stars. Its gentle variability and wind support the picture of an extended envelope. Those are solid anchors. The debated part is the precise placement on the evolutionary track and the timing of future transitions. Timing is especially hard to picture because the human mind expects steady rates. Stellar evolution is not steady in surface appearance. Long calm stretches can be followed by faster changes in late stages. yet the fast is still slow by daily standards. The mind can rest in that mismatch. It is an intuition limit, not a failure. A star can be stable for centuries, then shift noticeably over thousands of years, and both can be true within the same life cycle. Another distilled line can rest without label. The clock runs at different speeds. This matters because it prepares the sense that Deneb's future is shaped by internal thresholds, not by a smooth, predictable slope. The calm speculation can now be stated in a grounded sequence. Well-established massive stars evolve away from simple hydrogen burning and develop layered internal structures. Debated, the exact path across temperature and brightness depends on mass loss, rotation, and mixing. Reasonable speculation. Deneb may spend time drifting toward cooler conditions, then may move back toward hotter conditions if enough outer material is shed. None of these require a dramatic event in the near term. The star remains a steady beacon in the Swan for human timescales. The fifth small unlock arrives as the narrative returns to the Milky Way arm idea in a gentle way. Deneb's significance as a marker does not require knowing every interior detail. It is enough that Deneb is luminous, distant, and placed along a rich corridor of the galactic disk. Its light helps trace the sky geometry, and its type helps trace where massive stars tend to appear. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can widen from Deneb's personal future to the larger setting of the Cygnus region, where clusters gas and dust create a layered spiral arm corridor around the Swan's taillight. The Cygnus direction feels like looking down a long hallway, where the Milky Way grows denser and more textured. The early clarity as this Deneb sits near a line of sight that passes through active material-rich parts of the galactic disk, where structure is inferred rather than directly seen. The Northern Cross remains the gentle frame, and Deneb stays at the Swan's tail like a pale knot on a dark thread. Behind it, the Milky Way band resembles faint chalk on leaf velvet thickened here with darker streaks like smoke ribbons. That familiar river of light matters because it is not only scenery, it is a clue that the view crosses many layers of stars, dust, and gas. In such a layered view, Deneb becomes both a bright reference point and a reminder that depth is complicated. The first small unlock arrives softly. A single bright star can anchor orientation even when the background is crowded. The crowd is not random. It's part of the disk's architecture shaped by rotation and by where cold material collects. The mind can hold this architecture in a simple image, a spinning record with brighter streaks where the music is louder. Those streaks are not painted on. They are patterns that emerge from motion and gravity over long times. One new term can enter gently and do real work. A spiral arm is a long region with higher density of gas and young stars. It is like a slow traffic wave on a highway. It is like a crease in a rotating skirt that keeps reappearing. This matters because the Milky Way's arms are inferred from where star formation tends to occur, not from a single clean photograph. The Cygnus sightline points along an arm-like corridor where star formation is active and where dust lanes are common. Deneb's placement in that direction helps the mind keep the corridor from becoming abstract. Another visual anchor settles in warm and slow. The Milky Way in Cygnus looks thicker as if the chalk band has been rubbed again and again in the same place. Dark lanes cut across it like quiet rivers within the river, not moving, just present. Deneb shines above that texture like a porch light near water, cool white against a faint mottled glow. The corridor is not a single distance. It is many distances stacked like panes of lightly tinted glass. Some panes are clear, some are smoky, and each one reshapes the arriving light. This matters because it explains why mapping spiral structure from inside the disk is a craft of careful inference. The second small unlock follows as the arm idea becomes less rigid. A spiral arm is not a rail that stars ride. It is a region where material and orbits crowd in a pattern. Stars drift through and the pattern can persist like a wave that travels while individual drops of water move up and down. That wave-like picture keeps the tone calm because it replaces sharp boundaries with gentle tendencies. Deneb in this view is not required to belong to a single painted stripe. It is a luminous marker near a busy corridor, and the corridor is defined statistically by many such markers. One new term can enter without crowding and stay plain. An H2 region is a cloud of ionized hydrogen around hot young stars. It is like a fog bank lit by harsh lamps. It is like steam glowing near a bright burner. This matters because H2 regions trace where massive stars have recently formed. In the Cygnus direction, such glowing clouds and associated dust complexes signal that the disk here is active and structured. The visual anchor holds steady a faint river of starlight, with occasional brighter knots and darker cuts, like a river seen through reeds at night. Those knots are not all the same distance. Some are nearer, some are far, and some overlap in projection. That overlap is an observational limit spoken gently. From within the galaxy, different layers can sit along the same line of sight, and they can be hard to separate. The mind wants a single depth label for the whole scene. The real scene is layered like hills behind hills in mist. The hills are real, yet the exact ordering can blur when the mist thickens. Dust behaves like that mist, and it is especially strong along the galactic plane. Another small unlock arrives in the way different kinds of light handle the corridor. Visible light is easily softened by dust, while longer wavelengths can slip through more readily. That difference matters because spiral structure is often traced by combining multiple windows, each showing a different aspect of the same corridor. The listener does not need equipment to feel the logic. A smoky room hides a candle's details, yet a low warm glow can still be sensed from farther away. In a similar way, the galaxy's dust can hide fine structure and visible light, while still allowing the overall corridor to be recognized. Deneb's visible brightness is therefore a special kind of gift. It stays prominent even when the background is complicated, and it allows a familiar sky shape to sit on top of a deep active region. A distilled line can rest here without label. The pattern is seen through layers. This matters because it keeps the spiral arm concept grounded in observational reality rather than in a flat diagram. Another visual anchor returns to the summer triangle, which continues to hang overhead like three lanterns above a quiet field. Deneb's lantern touches the swan, and the swan points into the thickened Milky Way band. The field below remains dark and still, and the lanterns remain steady. That steadiness matters because it keeps attention gentle while the narrative widens to galactic scale. One main number can be allowed here, and translated immediately serving as the far rung of the scale ladder. The Milky Way is about 100,000 light-years across. That is like a message that would take 100,000 New Year's days to cross the disk at light speed. A very short line follows calm and quiet. Size turns slippery. This matters because it reframes the Cygnus corridor. The corridor is not a small neighbourhood within a modest city. It is a glance along the edge of a vast rotating disk where structures are drawn in probability and motion. Deneb's few thousand light-year distance sits as a nearer step within that greater span, and that placement helps scale feel orderly rather than overwhelming. The intuition limit returns softly at this far rung. A disk 100,000 light-years wide cannot be pictured as a single object from within, in the same way a forest cannot be seen fully from inside the trees. The map exists, but it is built from many partial views. Deneb is one of the trees that stands out bright and recognizable, making the forest direction easier to sense. Another small unlock follows as why it matters becomes practical. Spiral arm corridors are the places where gas turns into stars, where dust grains grow and break, and where chemical enrichment is stirred into new generations. Understanding these corridors is not only about a shape on a chart. It is about how a galaxy remains luminous over billions of years. Deneb contributes to that story in two calm ways. It is a bright marker that helps orient the sky, and it is an evolved star that sheds material back into the disk. The setting and the star reinforce each other, and the narrative remains gentle because the cycle is slow. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can move from the corridor's broad structure to the specific question of how spiral arm patterns are mapped from inside using motion gas tracers and careful inference, while Deneb remains a steady reference at the swan's tail. Deneb holds steady at the swan's tail while the Milky Way behind it refuses to sit still as a simple picture. The early clarity is this spiral structure is mapped from inside by following motion, and by using reliable signposts in gas and starlight. The Northern Cross remains a quiet frame, and Deneb stays like a pale knot at the end of a stitched shape. The Milky Way band in Cygnus looks thicker here, a chalk river on velvet with darker lanes, like smoke ribbons laid across it. That river matters because it is the galaxy's disk seen edge-on, and the disk is where spiral patterns live. A spiral arm is not a painted stripe overhead. It is a region where material tends to gather and form stars more often. The pattern is inferred from many partial views, like a landscape understood by walking its paths instead of seeing it from above. The first small unlock arrives gently. The galaxy is mapped by listening to how parts of it move. Motion turns depth into a measurable clue even when dust hides the view. One new term can enter with care and do real work. Doppler shift is a change in wavelength from motion along the line of sight. It is like a siren whose pitch changes as it passes. It is like a note that rises when a source approaches and falls when it recedes. This matters because gas in the Milky Way carries motion signatures that can be translated into distance estimates along certain directions. A slow visual anchor settles in Deneb as a clean lamp above a smoky river with faint background stars like grains of salt scattered across dark. The lamp is simple, yet the river is layered, and the layers move in different ways around the galactic centre. The observer cannot step outside the disk, so mapping becomes a craft of stitching together velocities, positions, and known landmarks. Deneb helps as a landmark in the sky, but the deeper mapping relies on gas because gas fills the arms and carries strong signals. Another small unlock follows when the mind accepts that the best map is assembled from many corridors. Each corridor is a line of sight like the Cygnus direction, and each line has its own mix of clouds, dust, and star clusters. Where corridors overlap, patterns become clearer. Where they disagree, the limits of the method become visible. The carve method is not to demand a perfect curve, but to look for repeated tendencies. Another visual anchor returns. The summer triangle hangs like three lanterns above a sleeping field, and Deneb's lantern touches the swan, pointing into the thicker Milky Way band. Under that calm geometry, unseen gas clouds drift and rotate, carrying the signature of their speed in the slight shifting of their spectral features. A second concept can enter without crowding. A tracer is something that marks where certain conditions exist. It is like smoke revealing the direction of airflow. It is like dye showing currents in water. This matters because some kinds of light or emission reveal coal gas warm ionized regions or newly formed stars, and those ingredients cluster in spiral patterns. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated immediately into a gentle household image. A famous hydrogen signal has a wavelength of about 21 centimeters. That is like the span of a hand or the length of a small ruler. A very short line follows quiet and steady. A simple length carries a map. This matters because such radio signals can pass through dust far better than visible light, letting structure be traced where the Milky Way looks opaque. The story remains calm because the map is built from patient accumulation rather than dramatic discovery. A third small unlock arrives as Doppler shift and tracers join into a single picture. Gas clouds along the disk rotate around the galaxy's centre, so different longitudes show different average speeds. Those speeds read through Doppler shift allow an estimate of where along the line of sight the gas likely sits. Tracers then reveal where gas becomes dense and where star formation heats and ionizes it. Together, motion and tracers form a scaffold for spiral structure. Yet the observational limit must be spoken softly. A given speed does not always correspond to a single distance because multiple locations can share similar line of sight motion. The geometry from inside creates ambiguities, especially towards and away from the centre, where directions align with rotation. The mind can picture driving on a curved ring road at night. Two cars in different places can have the same apparent speed relative to a roadside observer. Speed alone does not fix position. That is not a flaw in physics. It is a limit in perspective. Another visual anchor settles again in the Cygnus corridor. The Milky Way's darker lanes look like quiet cuts through the chalk river, and those cuts hint at dust clouds that block visible light while still harbouring gas. Deneb remains above that texture like a porch light that does not reveal the whole neighbourhood, only a reliable point to return to. This steadiness matters because it keeps attention anchored while the map grows complex. A distilled line can rest here without label. Perspective creates twins. This matters because it explains why spiral arm maps are revised and refined as new data and methods arrive. The pattern is real, but the path to it is indirect. Deneb's own distance uncertainty echoes this theme. Even a bright famous star can have a range of plausible placement, and that range is handled by combining constraints rather than forcing one answer. In the same way arm structure is constrained by many traces, many lines of sight and models of galactic rotation, another small unlock follows in the way the pattern becomes useful even when imperfect. A spiral arm does not need a razor edge to guide understanding. It is enough to know where the probability of cold gas dust lanes and young massive stars increases. Those are the regions where the galaxy builds new luminous populations and where feedback from hot stars reshapes clouds. The arm is then a living corridor, not a static stripe. The intuition limit appears here in a calm form. The mind wants an overhead picture like a photograph of a whirlpool. The Milky Way cannot be seen that way from Earth without leaving it, and dust would still hide parts of the disk. The map is therefore a model, and models are simplified. They keep what matters and smooth what cannot be resolved. That smoothing is not deception, it is the price of making a usable picture from partial information. Another visual anchor returns to the lantern geometry of the summer triangle steady and domestic while the deeper disk rotates on the timescales that exceed ordinary imagination. Deneb remains a quiet signpost within that large emotion, a light that marks a direction where gas-rich structure is common. A final small unlock settles softly. Even from inside structure can be known by consistency across methods. This matters because it makes the Milky Way feel less like an unknowable maze and more like a slowly legible home. The transition stays gentle and safe. The next section can move from mapping to consequence following how spiral arm corridors encourage star formation and how luminous stars like Deneb participate in the disk's long exchange of energy and matter. The Cygnus corridor feels quietly busy like a long avenue where unseen work continues behind darkened windows. Deneb's steady light belongs to a neighbourhood where gas gathers stars form and bright stars reshape their surroundings. The Northern Cross remains the calm frame and Deneb still sits at the swan's tail like a pale knot on a dark thread. Behind it, the Milky Way band looks like chalk on the velvet thicker here, with darker lanes like smoke ribbons. Those lanes matter because they hint at dense material, not empty darkness. Dense material is where new stars are born, and it is also where bright stars leave their strongest imprint. One new term can enter gently and carry the story. A molecular cloud is a cold, dense region where stars can form. It is like a fog bank in a quiet valley. It is like flour gathered in a bowl instead of scattered in air. This matters because star formation needs gas that can clump and cool. The first small unlock arrives softly. The Milky Way's bright band is not only starlight, it is also a sign that the line of sight crosses many layers of material. In Cygnus, some of that material sits in large cold clouds hidden in visible light by dust. The dust lanes are the visible edge of those clouds, like the shadow of a thicker object that cannot be fully seen. Deneb shines near this layered view, and the contrast is soothing. A cool white lamp sits above a smoky river, steady enough to anchor attention. The river's smoke-like cuts suggest places where light is blocked, and blocked light often marks where matter is collected. Another visual anchor settles in the summer triangle. 3 lanterns hang high above a sleeping field, and Deneb's lantern touches the swan. The geometry stays domestic and the depth stays implied. The corridor is a stack of rooms, not a flat wall, and some rooms contain dense fog. A second small unlock follows when star formation is treated as a change of state, not a sudden event. Cold gas can drift for a long time, then begin to collapse when it becomes dense enough. The collapse is not a sharp fall like a stone, and it is a slow gathering, like snow settling into a drift. Yet the observational limit remains calm and present. The densest parts of molecular clouds are often hidden in visible light, and the galaxy is viewed from within its own dust. That means the earliest phases are inferred, not watched directly in ordinary starlight. The mind wants a clear picture of a cloud turning into a star. The real evidence arrives in pieces stitched across different windows of light and across many regions. Another visual anchor returns to the Milky Way river in Cygnus. The chalk band looks thicker, as if rubbed again and again in one place. Dark lanes cross it like quiet canals. Deneb sits nearby like a porch light over water, not illuminating the whole river, only marking a place to return to. This steadiness matters because the next idea involves change and influence, and steadiness keeps the tone gentle. One new term can enter without crowding. Feedback is energy from stars altering nearby gas and dust. It is like a heater warming the air in a room. It is like wind reshaping a pile of loose sand. This matters because feedback can both encourage and suppress future star formation. The third small unlock arrives softly. Star formation is not a one-way drain of gas into stars. It's a conversation between gas and starlight, though not in words. Hot, luminous stars pour out ultraviolet-like winds and later shock waves, and these can carve cavities in nearby clouds. Carving can compress gas at an edge, triggering new collapse. Carving can also disperse gas, delaying collapse. The same influence can therefore build and break depending on geometry and timing. The mind can picture steam rising from a kettle in a small kitchen. The steam can fog the window, and it can also drive a gentle circulation in the air. The air's motion can gather scent in one corner and clear it in another. In a molecular cloud, energy does something about it on a far larger scale. It stirs, warms, and pushes. Another visual anchor settles in an imagined cavity within a dust lane, like a hollow in a snowbank where warm air has melted a pocket. The pocket is not seen directly in the night sky, but its outline can be inferred from the way dust and light arrange themselves. Deneb is not necessarily the sculptor of every nearby cavity, and it does not need to be. The corridor contains many luminous stars and clusters, each contributing to the slow shaping. Deneb's role is to make the idea easier to hold. A bright evolved star near an active direction suggests that massive stars exist and that the disk here is not quiet. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated immediately into a calm time image. Massive luminous stars influence their surroundings for about 10 million years. That is like 10 million New Year's mornings passing while the same region is steadily warmed and stirred. A very short line follows steady and quiet. Influence can outlast a glance. This matters because it shows why spiral arm corridors remain lively. Even when individual stars change, the pattern of energy input persists across many generations. The observational limit returns softly in a different form. Cause and effect are hard to assign in crowded regions. A cloud's shape can be influenced by several stars and by the galaxy's larger flows. From within the disk depth, confusion can overlay unrelated structures in the same direction. The mind wants a clean diagram with arrows. The real sky offers overlapping layers and partial evidence. That limit does not erase understanding, it simply sets the style of the understanding. It is statistical, not cinematic. Another small unlock follows as feedback is tied to the Milky Way's long-term balance. The disk must keep some gas cold enough to form new stars, yet it also must avoid collapsing all gas at once. Feedback provides a regulating push like a thermostat that prevents a room from overheating or freezing. In spiral arm corridors, gas collects more often, and feedback becomes stronger because more massive stars form there. The result is a rhythm of gathering and dispersal that repeats on large scales. Another visual anchor returns to the swan's outline. The Northern Cross remains a simple lattice, and Deneb at the tail feels like a finishing stitch. The lattice floats above the chalk river, and the chalk river hints at a busy layered disk. The calm promise continues. Deneb's light is not only a point of beauty, it is a sign that the galaxy's disk contains engines of energy and cycles of matter. The energy shapes clouds, the clouds form stars, and the stars reshape the clouds. The next step can move gently from energy to matter itself, following how winds and later stages return material to the disk and help future clouds cool and grow without opening any sharp new mystery. Deneb's light feels like a steady beacon, yet the deeper gift of such a star is the matter it quietly returns to the galaxy. The early clarity is this: the Milky Way stays bright over long time because stars both consume and recycle material. The Northern Cross remains the calm frame, and Deneb stays at the swan's tail like a pale knot on a dark thread. Behind it, the Milky Way band in Cygnus resembles chalk on velvet with darker lanes like smoke ribbons. Those lanes matter because they mark places where matter has gathered, and gathered matter is the starting point for future stars. Deneb belongs to the life cycle of stars not only by shining, but by shedding, stirring, and enriching. One new term can enter gently and do real work. Nucleosynthesis is making new elements inside stars. It is like a kiln transforming clay into ceramic. It is like a furnace changing raw ore into metal. This matters because the elements needed for planets and complex chemistry come from stellar interiors and stellar deaths. The first small unlock arrives softly. A star's light is energy leaving. A star's wind is matter leaving. Both are ways a star interacts with its surroundings. Deneb's wind carries gas outward into interstellar space, and that gas can include atoms that have been processed in the star's deep layers or in its outer envelope. The story stays careful. Deneb is not claimed as the sole source of enrichment in Cygnus. It is one vivid example that makes the cycle easier to picture. Another visual anchor settles in Deneb as a cool white porch light above a smoky river, with the river as the Milky Way band. The porch light is steady, but an invisible mist rises from the house and drifts into the street. That is the wind. It does not form a plume that can be seen by eye. It disperses into the disk, mixing with other outflows and with the gas already present. The second small unlock follows as a recycling and becomes a calm loop rather than a dramatic event. Gas leaves a star. Gas joins a cloud. A cloud cools and clumps. A new star forms and begins shining. The loop is slow, and each step can take far longer than a human lifetime. That slowness is part of the comfort of the story. It removes urgency, yet an observational limit must be spoken neutrally. The exact composition of Deneb's outflow and how much processed material it carries is inferred indirectly. Spectral signatures can suggest what is present, but models and assumptions enter. The wind can be clumpy, and the line of sight can include interstellar absorption that overlaps the star's own signatures. The mind wants a clean sample in a jar. The sky offers a mixed beam of light passing through multiple layers. This is not a barrier to understanding. It is a boundary that defines what can be claimed with confidence. Another visual anchor returns to the Milky Way's dark lanes in Cygnus. They look like quiet cuts through the chalk river, as if someone dragged a finger through soft powder. Those cuts can be pictured as dense clouds blocking visible light, while the rest of the chalk band shows countless distant stars. Deneb shines near the edge of this textured region, and the contrast makes the scene easy to hold. One new term can enter without crowding and can keep the matter story practical. Metallicity is the fraction of elements heavier than helium. It is like the seasoning level in a soup. It is like the mineral content in a bottle of water. This matters because metallicity affects how gas cools and how easily planets and dust grains can form. The third small unlock arrives quietly. Recycling changes the galaxy's ability to build structure. When heavier elements and dust grains are present, gas clouds can radiate heat away more efficiently, which helps them collapse. Dust grains also provide surfaces for molecules to form and can shield cold regions from harsh radiation. In this way, the products of stars become the tools of future stars. Deneb's wind is a small contribution to that toolset. Many stars contribute at once across the disk, and the galaxy becomes over time more chemically rich. Another visual anchor settles in the summer triangle again, like three lanterns above a sleeping field. Deneb's lantern touches the swan, and the swan points into the thickened Milky Way band. The lantern geometry remains domestic and the chemistry remains vast, yet the narrative keeps them linked through simple images. A furnace in a city adds a faint haze to the air. Over time, many furnaces change the city's atmosphere. In the Milky Way, many stars change the disk's chemical state. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated into an everyday comparison. The Milky Way forms on the order of 1 or 2 sun masses of new stars per year. That is like adding one small house worth of material to a vast city each year. A very short line follows calm and steady. The building never stops. This matters because it frames recycling as an ongoing process, not a past event. The galaxy is not finished. It continues to convert gas into stars while feedback and recycling keep some gas available. Deneb sits inside this living system both as a marker of a spiral corridor and as a participant in matter exchange. The observational limit returns in a different way. The star formation rate is an estimate with method dependence. It varies by tracer and by region, and it can change over time. The mind can accept this as part of the same theme. The galaxy is measured through proxies, and proxies carry uncertainty. Yet the broad picture holds. Matter cycles, energy flows, structure emerges and persists. Another small unlock follows as the meaning of spiral arm becomes more grounded in matter. Arms are regions where gas is gathered and where star formation is enhanced. If recycling enriches the gas, then arms become sites where enriched material is repeatedly processed into new luminous populations. Deneb's direction in Cygnus points into such a site. The star's light and wind both connect to the corridor. The light reveals the corridor's dust by contrast. The wind adds to the corridor's reservoir by slow mixing. The intuition limit appears softly. It is hard to picture mixing on galactic scales. The mind wants a spoon in a bowl. The disk is vast and mixing is driven by rotation turbulence and large-scale flows. The best image is gentle and indirect. It is like a slow swirl in a cup of tea where the colour spreads outward over many minutes. The swirl is not chaotic. It is smooth, and it is driven by the cup's shape and by the initial stir. The Milky Way's rotation is that stir steady and persistent. A distilled line can rest without label. Recycling is a kind of patience. This matters because it turns the life cycle into a calm perspective rather than an abstract fact. Deneb's place in this patience is not sentimental. It is physical. A luminous supergiant sheds matter. The matter joins clouds. Clouds seed new stars. Over long time, the disk becomes richer and more structured. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can move closer to Deneb, again focusing on how Deneb can serve as a distance marker, and why that role remains difficult, keeping the same calm attention to limits and to the practical value of imperfect knowledge. Deneb remains a calm beacon at the swan's tail, and that calm hides how hard it is to place the star precisely in depth. The early clarity is this. Deneb is useful as a distance reference only when multiple imperfect methods are combined with care. The Northern Cross stays as the steady quilt pattern, and Deneb still feels like a pale knot that finishes the stitched figure. Behind it, the Milky Way band in Cygnus continues to look like chalk on velvet thicker, here with darker lanes like smoke ribbons. Those lanes matter because they dim and tint light and distance estimates depend on how much light truly leaves the star. Deneb's brightness in the sky is easy. Deneb's true output is harder, and true output is the key to using a star as a marker. One new term can enter gently and do real work. Distance modulus is a link between true and apparent brightness. It is like comparing a lamp's wattage to how bright it looks. It is like judging distance by how much a known candle has faded. This matters because it turns brightness into a distance estimate when true output is known. The first small unlock arrives softly. A distance estimate can be built like a braid. One strand is parallax when it is measurable. One strand is spectral analysis, which constrains temperature and class. One strand is dust correction, which estimates how much light is lost. Braided together, the strands can hold. Alone, each strand can fray. Deneb's case shows why the braid matters. Deneb is far enough that parallax becomes delicate. Deneb is luminous enough that small errors in distance imply large errors in luminosity. Deneb lies toward a dusty corridor, so dust correction matters and can vary. The result is not a single crisp placement, but a range that narrows as methods improve. Another visual anchor settles in Deneb as a cool white porch light above a smoky river, steady and bright against a textured band. The porch light looks simple, but the window between the lamp and the street has a faint tint. That tint is dust. If the tint is misjudged, the lamp can be misread as weaker or stronger than it truly is. This matters because it explains why Deneb's distance has been debated even while the star remains famous and easy to find. One main number can be allowed here, and translated immediately in a calm way. Deneb is often placed roughly a couple thousand light years away. That is like a message that has been travelling for thousands of New Year's mornings before arriving now. A very short line follows, gentle and steady. A range can be honest. This matters because it reframes what knowing means in astronomy. Knowing can mean a bracketed answer with a carefully stated uncertainty, not a single point. The observational limit appears here in a neutral tone. When parallax is tiny, systematic errors can matter as much as random noise. When dust is patchy, a single correction may not apply cleanly. When a star is a supergiant with an extended atmosphere defining a stable surface and true brightness becomes more model dependent. These limits are not flaws. They are boundaries that guide better measurement and better humility. The second small unlock arrives when Deneb's difficulty becomes its value. A hard case can improve the tools. Deneb sits in a sweet spot where it is bright enough for detailed spectroscopy and repeated monitoring, yet far enough to stress distance techniques. It becomes a benchmark not because it's simple, but because it is demanding. The mind can picture a violin string used to tune an ear. A simple tone is easy. A subtle tone refines hearing. Deneb refines the methods that place stars in depth. Another visual anchor returns to the summer triangle like three lanterns above a sleeping field. The triangle's domestic geometry keeps attention soft-forward while the concept of a distance ladder grows more abstract. Deneb's lantern is the one that touches the swan, and the swan points into the thicker Milky Way band. That direction is a corridor where dust and star-forming regions complicate the view, so Deneb's placement carries extra importance for that slice of the disk. A third small unlock follows as the distance modulus idea is kept gentle and plain. If true brightness is known, distance follows from how dim it appears. If distance is known, true brightness follows from how dim it appears. This circular dependence is the heart of the distance ladder. It is resolved by anchoring the ladder at the nearest rungs where geometry is strongest and then carrying calibration outward. Deneb's range becomes narrower when calibration improves and when dust is mapped more carefully along the corridor. This matters because it shows how astronomy builds reliability not by claiming perfection, but by tightening constraints over time. The intuition limit arrives in a calm form. The mind wants depth to be seen directly like a hallway measured with footsteps. In space, the hallway has no floor markings, and the eye has no stereoscopic baseline for far objects. Depth must be inferred by indirect clues, and indirect clues can be ambiguous. The ambiguity is not endless, but it is real. The best response is to use many clues and to state uncertainty openly. Another visual anchor settles again in the Milky Way's dark lanes. They look like soft cuts through the chalk river, as if powder has been brushed aside. Those cuts are not empty gaps. They are dense regions that block visible light. Deneb's beam passes near and through such regions, and the regions shape what arrives. This matters because it explains why Deneb can feel like it lights a spiral corridor. The star's brightness stands out against a complex dusty background, making the corridor visible by contrast. Distilled line can rest here without label. Contrast is a kind of map. This matters because it ties the title's idea to a practical perception. Deneb does not illuminate the Milky Way like a lamp in a room. It illuminates by being a stable, bright reference against the galaxy's textured band. The arm-like corridor is perceived through the distribution of dust gas and star density along that direction. Deneb helps the mind hold that direction as a meaningful slice of the disk, even while the exact depth remains partly uncertain. The fourth small unlock follows as value returns home. Knowing Deneb's distance within a range still matters because it anchors the scale of a region, calibrates the luminosity of a supergiant class, and supports broader maps of spiral structure. It also teaches a calm lesson about science. Precision has limits, and those limits can be described without losing meaning. Deneb remains a bright, steady point in the swan, and the mind can let the uncertainty be part of the beauty, not a defect. The transition stays soft and safe. The next section can begin the return home beat more fully, letting the sky's familiar geometry and Deneb's steady presence settle into a warm sense of place while the narrative prepares for gentle closure. Deneb stays where the swan ends, and that steadiness makes the whole sky feel more arranged than it truly is. The early clarity is this: a single bright star can hold together a chain of scales from a familiar constellation to a spiral corridor in a vast galaxy. The Northern Cross remains the quiet frame, and Deneb still feels like a pale knot that finishes a stitched figure. Behind it, the Milky Way band in Cygnus continues to resemble chalk on velvet, thicker, here with darker lanes like smoke ribbons. Those lanes matter because they remind the mind that the galaxy is not a clean picture. It is a layered medium where light is filtered, softened, and sometimes hidden. Deneb's brightness stands out against that medium, and the contrast makes the corridor feel real even when its depth is partly uncertain. The first small unlock arrives softly. Orientation can be both emotional and scientific without becoming personal. A sky pattern provides calm, and calm allows careful thought. Deneb anchors the summer triangle, and the triangle anchors seasonal rhythm. Seasonal rhythm anchors repeated observation. Repeated observation anchors measurement. Measurement anchors a map, and the map anchors meaning. This chain is quiet and it holds without force. One new term can enter gently and do real work. Asterism is a recognizable star pattern, not an official constellation. It is like a familiar group of landmarks in a neighborhood. It is like a set of street corners used for navigation. This matters because the summer triangle is an asterism that guides both casual-looking and careful data collection. Deneb's role in it is practical. It provides a bright corner that is easy to return to, which makes long-term monitoring and calibration calmer and more reliable. Another visual anchor settles in 3 lanterns overhead above a sleeping field, steady and cool, with Deneb's lantern touching the swan. The field below remains dark and still, and the lantern geometry remains domestic. The story then returns to the scale ladder that has been built slowly. Near-rung, the porch-light feeling of a first-magnitude star. Mid-rung, thousands of light-years, a message travelling for thousands of New Year's mornings. Far-rung, the Milky Way's wide disk, a city so large it takes 100,000 light-years to cross. One main number can be allowed here, and it can be translated gently. Deneb's light is roughly a couple thousand years delayed. That is like hearing a bell that rang before many human lifetimes began. A very short line follows, soft and steady. Now arrives late. This matters because it reframes what is meant by present. It turns the night sky into a layered archive rather than a live broadcast. Deneb becomes a page in that archive, bright enough to read even through a textured corridor. The second small unlock arrives when the earlier paradox is allowed to relax. Bright does not mean close, yet bright can still mean useful. Deneb's brightness makes it a stable reference point against the Milky Way's complex background. Even when distance remains a range, the star still anchors direction, temperature class, and the sense of a luminous population in a spiral corridor. Deneb's place at the swan's tail becomes more than a decorative label. It becomes a hinge between domestic sky geometry and galactic structure. Another visual anchor returns to the Milky Way's dark lanes in Cygnus. They appear like soft cuts in chalk, not empty gaps, but dense clouds blocking visible light. Deneb sits near this texture like a clean bead above smoke, and that contrast keeps the corridor tangible. The observational limit can be spoken again in a calm, closing way. The mind wants a perfect depth coordinate for Deneb. The sky offers signals shaped by dust, by distance, and by the star's own extended atmosphere. Instruments and models reduce uncertainty, but they do not erase it completely. This is not a weakness. It is the natural boundary of remote sensing. The boundary is like the horizon at sea, clear enough to steer by, not sharp enough to measure with a ruler. The third small unlock follows as value returns without sentimentality. Imperfect knowledge can still guide, a range can still calibrate, a pattern can still orient. Deneb's distance uncertainty does not remove its role in understanding Supergiant's mapping spiral corridors and grasping the Milky Way from inside. It simply keeps the understanding honest and quiet. The intuition limit appears gently as the story returns home. The galaxy cannot be held in the mind as a full overhead photograph. It must be held as a set of corridors and anchors stitched together like a quilt. Deneb is one of the stitches. The Northern Cross is a quilt square. The Summer Triangle is another. The Milky Way band is the fabric beneath. The stitching is done by observation, patience, and careful correction. Another distilled line can rest here without label. The map is made from return visits. This matters because it frames astronomy as a practice of revisiting the same sky with deeper questions, not a rush toward final answers. Deneb's quiet constancy supports that practice. The star's light arrives steady. The swan's outline repeats. The seasons cycle. The data accumulate. Over time, the corridor becomes clearer, even if it never becomes perfect. The fourth small unlock arrives as the cycle of matter is allowed to settle into place. Deneb sheds wind. Wind joins the disk's gas. Gas gathers in molecular clouds. Clouds form new stars. Those stars later shed and enrich again. The spiral corridor is not only a pattern of light, it is a route of material exchange, a slow circulation within a rotating disk. Deneb participates in that circulation simply by being what it is, a luminous supergiant in a living galaxy. The story returns to the simplest visual anchor once more. Deneb at the swan's tail, cool white and steady above the faint chalk river of the Milky Way. The sky is quiet. The pattern is familiar. The scale is vast, yet it has been stepped through, gently rung by rung, until it feels less like a void and more like a structured home. The transition remains soft and safe, and it prepares a descent. The next part can release the remaining tension and let the images fade slowly, keeping only the steady triangle and the calm tail light of the swan. Deneb remains at the swan's tail as a calm point of return, and the mind can let the larger map rest without being held tightly. The summer triangle stays simple like three lanterns suspended over a quiet field, and the Northern Cross stays like a stitched figure on dark cloth. Nothing in the sky demands urgency. The corridor of the Milky Way in Cygnus remains a faint chalk river with soft smoke lane cuts, and those lanes can be allowed to be texture rather than problem. A single bright star can carry many meanings at once without strain. It can be a guide to orientation. It can be a reminder that brightness is received light shaped by distance and by dust. It can be a gentle sign that the galaxy is a layered disk, not a flat dome. The far scales can loosen. Thousands of light years becomes a slow time delay rather than an empty gap. A spiral corridor becomes a tendency rather than a line. Uncertainty becomes a boundary rather than a threat. Deneb's steadiness makes it possible to accept the boundary with calm. The picture does not need sharp edges to be useful. A range can still anchor understanding, and a familiar pattern can still hold attention softly. Deneb shines, and a little of Deneb drifts outward as wind joining the Milky Way's long recycling. The disk gathers and disperses, forms stars and returns material, and the cycle continues at a pace that exceeds ordinary imagination. The night sky can be allowed to feel like a quiet archive where light arrives from different times layered gently into the present. The final image can stay simple and warm, a pale bead of light at the swan's tail above a faint river of starlight with three lantern points forming a triangle that comes and goes with the seasons. The story can end with that steadiness, letting the details fade, while the calm structure remains as if the quilt of the sky has been folded and placed nearby.